Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you tuning in from. This is Gifty Annie, your host and mentor for the Intentional Beacon podcast, where we shine light on the power of intentionality and authenticity for our guests to share their unique stories about how they've navigated life challenges, but with clarity and purpose to make a difference in the areas they've been called to excel and to make a difference in our world, in our families, in our communities. So today, without taking much time, I've got a very, very special guest that I've known and I've been blessed to connect with. And I love what she does. But again, so huge that she's going to share just the some of what she's doing briefly with us as listeners. She is an American certified occupational therapist. You may ask, what is that? But she is going to go into that, working with children and families with neurodiversity issues. And her key message is to promote inclusivity and supportive environment for these children with additional needs. And she's also a therapeutic, innovative practitioner. And it sounds big word, but she will go into it and simplify it for us. So without taking much time, I welcome Elizabeth Joy Shaffer. I hope I pronounced your name properly. But and welcome. I'm honored and delighted to have you on this uh, uh, podcast with me to share your unique stories. So please go ahead and let our listeners know who you are and how you would like to be known. Thank you.
So much, Kitty. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Yeah, I think like many of us in life, right? We have our strengths and we have our challenges. And I think when we find a way to push through some of those challenges, it gives us the drive to then help others to do the same, right? And so I would say, that's really where I come from. I think a lot of people, I, I'm from the United States and I'm an occupational therapist. And I actually chose that profession because I could have one degree and do a ton of different things. So for someone who also would be considered someone who thinks differently, I don't have any diagnoses, but I get the kids that I work with. I repeated kindergarten because I sat in a separate room and did puzzles for the whole year. Today, I'm sure I would have been flagged for having some challenges. And it was interesting because I think growing up in the time that I did, people didn't see these challenges the way they do now. And I also think the challenges aren't as pronounced and impactful as they are now. Because even though I was a child who and I didn't even know I had sensory processing challenges. I didn't know my sensory system was very sensitive, sound, touch, hearing, that's why I couldn't go in the room with the other classmates because it overwhelmed my nervous system and I was more comfortable in the other room doing puzzles. And during recess, I would go on the swings the whole entire time because it calmed my nervous system, helped me to regulate. And so even though I had these sensory challenges, and the whole neighborhood knew when my hair was being brushed because my mother would be running after me with a hairbrush and I would be screaming down the street like, I hated, my scalp was so sensitive. And think of these kids now who can't have haircuts because they're so sensitive, right? And so I get the kids that I work with because I too had a very sensory sensitive sensory system. But I didn't even know I had all this till I literally was doing a 2-day seminar in Macedonia on sensory integration and teaching parents and professionals the sensory systems
Wow.
impact on behavior and learning with professionals and parents. Because to me, especially with kids with autism and other diagnoses, when you understand how the senses work, either to promote learning or impact behavior or diminish, it's a piece of knowledge that I found as a therapist so important. But I didn't even realize I had my own sensory challenges till I was up giving this talk and realizing it. So this is an area that I'm really passionate about. But I think that's, we in trying to understand myself and the kids that I worked with, it took me on this whole journey of understanding why children are struggling, right? They like, why is it one child, you can give them something, they look at it, they figure it out, and they can come back and do it again. Where another child, they could do it 100 times and
Right.
they're still not getting it, right? Like, what is
Right.
that disconnect? And so that's where I really went in depth with the training with the sensory and to understand myself and my kids and how can I help others with this different frame. But it all stems from my own journey and realizing, and I think all of us are here, right? Like a lot of us, we're healing ourselves and then we heal others, right?
Yes,
And,
yes, yes.
and so that's really been my journey. So as an occupational therapist, I chose to be an OT because we get to work with everything.
Yes,
So,
yes.
when we come in and see a child struggling, we don't just look at, okay, social, emotional, mental. We look at the physical, the neurological pathways, their ability to learn, focus, skills, motor skills, environment, what is in the classroom that's impacting them, how are the teachers relating to them, how are the parents. We look at everything. So for me, with the way my brain works, and I think, when we look at neurodiversity, it's finding those things, and that was my strength, is connecting things, where people sometimes don't always look at that big picture. So yeah, in my journey, that's just taking these, yeah, learning about my own journey, what helped me, and helping others at the same time.
Wow, wow, that's awesome. And so what I hear you say, basically your personal experience led you to where you are today because you can relate to what other children are currently experiencing. And so it's been a blessing in disguise, let me put it, and to help you see what children with additional needs or struggling with certain basic skills are perceived, how they can be perceived and be supported in our society, not only in our families, but of course, children have to relate to outsiders, and that is very key, very key. But we wish your mom was here to explain because he may be a better teacher how she was able to mold you, shape you, and contain your needs to
But she
become who you
didn't.
are
She
today.
actually didn't. When I grew up, it
Mm,
was a different era. And it's interesting because we look
mm,
at the era, and when I grew up back in the late
mm.
70s and 80s, it was a very different parent dynamic.
Yeah,
Kids
yeah,
just played outside, and parents,
yes.
it is a very different parent-child dynamic. And I just had this talk in Kazakhstan, looking back to solve the problems in the future.
Mm,
And one of the things is I played. So even though I had a dysregulated sensory system, I was
mhm.
jumping on the trampoline in the neighbor's house. I was
That's
swinging off vines in the forest. I was moving. I was playing. And so the nervous system was developing and regulating, where our kids now aren't doing this.
yeah.
Does that make sense?
Right.
And
Yeah, yeah, I hear that, but that means it's the environmental factor as well, from
yeah,
what I heard you
cultural.
say. Probably, they are very restricted to certain environment, and that is likely to impact on how they demonstrate, express themselves, and connect with things that they need to learn, which is very difficult. I just would like to touch on, is there a way these children can be easily or can be diagnosed early? Because in your case, you did not know until you developed yourself to even be in a position to
Yeah.
learn about this, to impart that knowledge that you got to know, which is an amazing journey. At the same time, if you hadn't, maybe you are different. It could have done more damage, but then
Um,
again, I don't know.
yeah, and I think, that there's a couple layers to that question.
Mm.
I think one, I look at the preventative
Yeah,
and then also so preventing skill loss and then promoting skill development, right? And so these kids, right, that their nervous system or their developmental system is not developing because there's layers to it. One, we can do a preventative. We need to do more education to parents on the importance of how does development happen because there's no training for parents. Like there's
no,
none.
no, no.
You're raising a human
Yeah,
being. That is the
yeah,
hardest job
yes,
ever. And
yes,
there is no guidance.
no.
There's a well checkup where you check some of the boxes to make sure they're growing physically, but
Mm.
there is no information because if a parent knew that when a child is crawling, the longer they crawl, the more their ability to have bilateral coordination
Yeah,
develops. The more they crawl, and when they look up and they look down and they look up and they're down and they're crawling and moving in their environment, their eyes, their ocular motor, being able to hone in and target something that's far and near develops. So their visual perceptual skills develop, their ocular motor, which translate to being able to look at the board and copy later
okay, right.
and
Right.
memory. So what we don't understand, there's so many things when kids are
Mm.
playing when they're younger that are
Mhm.
creating this neural pathway of development.
Yes.
And I think if parents knew that, they would absolutely promote their kids crawling more and
Mhm.
support their kids to have the room to play. But right now, I think kids are on a device. They're not moving or they're strapped in a car seat when they're
Yeah.
out and they're not. And so I think there's a couple things, lots of passions
Yes.
that I have, but
Mm.
that's one of them is that understanding. And so,
Mhm.
yes, we can talk about diagnoses, but then you're on a wait list for 2 years.
Yeah.
And then you're
Yeah.
seeking the help of an outside provider, which is
Mhm.
fine. But I think we need to empower and put the support more in the parents,
Parents. Mhm.
supporting the parents.
Mhm.
Um, not, obviously looking at, going to the physician, but a lot of these parents are going to their physician and they're saying, well, just give it a little bit or let's see, or do you
Mhm.
see what I mean? So
Yes,
even
yeah.
red flags, I just gave a talk to med students. Actually, it was
Yeah.
a talk where it was a university with medical students, future teachers, and psychologists.
Wow. Wow.
And I was really sharing this that one, listen to your clients, because I think that's one of the best
Yes.
things you can do as a
Best
medical
teachers.
provider. But this is a different frame and lens to look through with that developmental piece that is very unique for my profession because we are looking at how everything works together in the development, but a lot of professions don't look at it that
Look
way.
at it. So yeah, I do connect with the fact that children has to be stimulated. And when as practitioners, we encourage parents to be stimulated, well stimulated, then they have to be also adequately prepared from what you're saying and the environmental factors that are likely to impact or restrict the child's development is not may not be known to the parent. And so, of course, from what you've said, it reminds me the fact that parenting are passed on. What the parent has received, And if you are not aware of, the makeup of your own children, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. And so from you touch on some of the things that have inspired you to reach this stage. What are some of the misconceptions that we need to, diffuse, so that the practitioners, health practitioners, parents themselves, and educators will be aware to shift that mindset? Because I think without that, just some of the misconceptions that of neurodiversity issues that you are talking about in our children.
Well, and when we're talking about neurodiversity, it's a nervous system, and we all have it. We all have a
Yeah.
nervous system.
Mhm.
and, and,
Yes.
and, and it's our gateway from our
Mhm.
internal world to the external world,
Yeah.
right? We all have it.
Yeah.
and it is, and so I think misconceptions and things, I think number one, empathy and
Mm.
understanding is number one. Because if I could just
Mm.
take out the word judgment,
Mhm.
it just, and that's one thing. Parents don't want to get help sometimes because they feel like they're being judged. Because if my child's struggling, then people think it's because of me. So
Mm.
sometimes don't
Mm.
seek help because they're afraid of being judged.
Yeah.
And and sometimes parents may be judging the doctor. They don't know what I'm going through, so they
Mhm.
can't help me. So both way that judgment is impeding collaborative support to help the
Yeah.
child.
Yeah.
So with misconceptions, I think coming from an open mind and empathy, all sides, when
Yeah.
we're talking about helping the parent and the child, can really open the door for practitioners and parents to just, thinking we're all doing our best. And I always try to just think
Mhm.
of that, right? We're all human beings on this world,
Yes.
just trying our best.
Mhm.
But some of us haven't given the tools
No.
to navigate
Mhm.
these challenges,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And so when people are coming for help, whether you have the tools or not, seek and share that. But it also comes down to sometimes it doesn't have to be a complicated answer.
Yeah.
Sometimes we look at so many, oh, this diagnosis, this, but sometimes like I feel like we just need to come back and just connect more and be with our kids more. And because this our kids need us just to connect with them from a place of love. Like our society, we're so stressed, we're too busy, right? And I think it's just kind of, I thought COVID was going to help. I thought when COVID hit, people were
Yeah.
going to have more time to reflect and connect with one another and realize that we needed to like disconnect from the computer a little bit more and connect
Yes.
with each other. But I think we've wound back up and we're
Mhm.
right back into our fast-paced society.
Mhm.
But yeah, I'd like to see the misconceptions with neurodiversity is just because you have a challenge in one thing doesn't mean that you don't have many strengths in another thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Mhm.
So I would say, and that's non-judgment, my mom raised me, she said, just because you're good in one thing doesn't mean, that other person, you may be better than them in that one thing, but they're
Mhm.
better than you in another thing. And I think if we can,
Yes.
you
Yes.
know, and so
Mhm.
really bring this a bit more human side back to
Mhm. Mhm.
as healthcare professionals and educators and because I know we have a lot of checklists and things and bureaucracy
Yes.
things behind us.
Mhm.
And those are important, I guess. But I think just coming back human to human, empathy and
Yeah.
listening can help a parent to feel better about their child and just
Um,
telling them we know you're doing the best and we'll offer help. I think, and even with my kids when they're struggling, sometimes I don't always have to fix it, but if I
mhm.
acknowledge it
Yeah.
and believe in them that it will get better and help them with the tools, sometimes that's all it's needed. I don't even have to fix
Mhm.
it, but if I give them the seed of belief and then also the tools behind it, but
Yeah,
in a way.
that is awesome because so what we are saying, we need to, as practitioners, on all those connecting with children and families with these unique needs, neurodiversity, we need to acknowledge what parents are going through. Yes, practitioners, you will have to do your assessment, but it's to get them and assess them uniquely, not painting them as they should all be the same. Parents have come from different background, different needs, different insights, and so it's a huge job, given the resources that practitioners have, very limited. And so they tend to resort to tick boxes. Yes, this was done, this wasn't done, this is needed, this is not needed. I understand from both sides, but this means huge education, not only for the parents to be partners with everyone working, partnership working. And so that is very, very insightful for me. And also, I hope our listeners are also taking on board what you're saying. And it's not something that you can teach people everything in terms of how they should connect, be empathetic, and meet the unique needs of these families. It's a big challenge, but then again, it is achievable. I think what I'm hearing you is with time, people can turn around, have a shift of mindset to connect. Wow, 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 wow.
And we may not be able to have the time, and I know resources,
Mm,
especially in healthcare around the world, is taxed, and I understand we're very limited, but I think in, like you said, intentional, right? And I think if
Intentional.
we're intentional
Mhm.
and mindful when we are in that little space with those clients and just send them some empathy, belief, that can ignite their belief in themselves. Sometimes we take it on like we need to heal we need to fix them. But if we can look at it differently and think we can be a facilitator to support their growth, it can empower them, but take some of the
Mm.
pressure off, and we're doing it together.
Yeah, 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 and that is the partnership aspect. But I believe you've got unique stories that are pivotal in spite of the challenges. Are you able to share any of these unique stories that has gone very well? Because this is what you've done for many years, some of the highlights and you know, pivotal moments. Can you share anything that can inspire our audience and our listeners that this is achievable?
I mean, I was the
Mhm.
kid in kindergarten that struggled. I was the one who, but I was smart enough. I couldn't get the reading van, but I struggled. And I think this is the hard thing too, is there's a lot of those kids that are in between that are smart enough
Yeah.
to get by, but they're really struggling. And if they don't have, and I think having someone who believes in you
Yeah.
can make the difference, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a counselor, whether it's can make the difference, because I kept going even with all my struggles. And I ended up getting honor roll, graduating
Oh,
cum
wow.
laude. I have my
Yeah.
doctorate. I just spoke in front of 1,000 people.
Wow.
And this was the child who had a hard
Mm.
time putting their words together on paper.
Oh,
And
wow.
so, and even, when I go to the gym, I'm not coordinated, but when I do my work, I function better. But it's like, how do we support human development?
Mhm.
And I think this is where, as the society, we know healthcare is kind of having some issues, education's having some issues. Like, I feel like we need to kind of go backwards and support human development
Yeah. Wow.
a lot more, because this world's not easy. And
No, no.
I'm grateful for all of my knowledge personally that I've gone through to learn how to navigate and change my mindset. And that's so I do that with parents now too, to help parents with the stress and mindset and energy so they can make that shift for their kids. But it's finding that thing that empowers you to feel better, know better, and then do better.
Better. I like that. Know better, do better, feel better. Um, as you were talking, the word blaming culture came to mind, and I don't know how it fits in, maybe particularly with our children, labeling them. And of course, with parents, as you said, we think they already may be feeling guilty, and we may pronounce it in a way that we may think is something that they've done. Is there any basic advice to encourage people before we summarize? Mm.
That's a I could talk a whole day on
Okay,
this.
but just maybe
I know.
steps and advice for
Okay.
parents and
All right. So
teachers
I'll give
and everything.
one small advice for parents. Just because there's a label, to me, that's a way of understanding some of the challenges better, but that doesn't negate progress. So my child has autism. And so sensory, you can be overwhelming. And I know when we were at amusement park, certain kids, because they had a hard time standing in line, would get these passed to go in the front of the line. And so there's this cross between enabling and supporting. And even though my child could have had this modification to do that, I said, no, he lives in a world where he is going to have to learn how to wait in line.
Wow. Wow.
And so I'm not and so I think sometimes parents, it's this dance, right? Like a child that has autism, you want to be acknowledged and you want to know the nervous system and make sure they're feeling safe and doing things to help them feel safe, but then give them these small little things to overcome their challenges. And this is sometimes parents, it is a dance, right? And so they're like, oh, well, he has autism, he can't do this. And this is a fear that, and this is like C, which limits the child getting over that. So
Right.
that would be a word of caution with that labeling. Um, you don't want to use that as, but also labeling, it's just a difference, right? Children with autism
Yes.
just interpret things differently. And it's just
Yeah.
so rather than a label, I like to look at the symptoms. Like, okay,
Yeah.
what's going on and how can I help with these symptoms to help them through it? So labels are fine, but I think sometimes we're so concerned with getting a label that we forget of helping with the symptoms.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's summarized in a way that it's not just being empathetic and connecting with them, but also facilitating their development, enabling them to rather than restrict them. Because, and I hear your heart saying sometimes we protect these children, restrict them, and so they are not able to achieve their full potentials that God has placed in them. And this is powerful. And I'm sure the listeners, and we need to continue with this conversation again because there's so much to unpack. This is really touch on the basic thing, being intentional to acknowledge any struggles your child may have if they fall into this category. And I think it's for every child to develop their full optimum potential. We need to, it's a journey for parents. And to allow you to share your final word and maybe how people can connect with you. But I think I've got your details and your website, so I can add to that later on.
So I would say the final word is also
Mm.
sometimes we tend to focus so much on the challenges and the problem, but sometimes the quote the more by Wayne Dyer, and it's very really a good quote. Um, the energy flow, or where your attention goes, the energy flows. And that's not my guy, that's someone else. But if we keep focusing on the challenges, the behaviors, the negatives, sometimes we see more and more of that. And so
Yes.
with parents, like one key thing when I'm working with parents is is to really be mindful of where your attention and energy is all the time. Because sometimes as parents, we get in this worry, fear, always focusing on what the child can't do and all the struggles and all of the behaviors that didn't really does a toll on our own health and mental and emotional well-being, but also the relationship with our child. Because if every time we're looking at our child feeling sad, guilty, regretting what they can't do, that's the energy we're giving to that child.
Wow. Thank you
And
so much.
switching that from a place of love where you can love yourself and just even those little moments with your child, not thinking of what you should do, not thinking of the disability or challenge or anything, but just being with them to read a
Yeah,
book or to have it, but really trying to clear the thought of the minds and just connecting with love. That's what our kids need from us.
yeah.
And I would
Mm,
leave them with that, of that really shifting from that where we can, that from that stress and fear as a culture to just love and connection. This is what our kids need. This is what we need. And that's
mm.
what I'll leave them with.
Wow, wow. Thank you so, so much for sharing this unique story. I think we could go on the whole day, and we should arrange for further uh, time to give a lot more insight to our listeners, and because this is powerful. And so, what I'm going to say, thanks for your time. And I hope our listeners, you've got some nuggets of wisdom from this conversation with our guest, Elizabeth Joy Shaffer, and and mm, and how you can connect with. Did you have something simple to connect with him? And I
Yeah.
hope. Mhm.
My website, I think that's probably the easiest.
Yes, yeah.
It's therapy, THEAPRYINTL.com.
Right.
So
Thank you. I'll add that to that. So until the next episode, thank you for joining us. I hope you've been inspired, educated, and empowered to apply some of these nuggets into to supporting other parents in your family, in our community, in wherever you're working with children. Children are asset to us, and we need to cherish them and help them to reach their full potentials. And thank you so much. Until the next episode, thank you, Elizabeth, for your time again. And so for our listeners, bye bye. And till next episode, continue to be a beacon and shine your light. Bye bye.
thank you, Gifty. Bye bye.
Okay.